Hey, Internets. It's Dave. It's Matt. Dork Lords. We are here talking about Black Widow and the future of the MCU. It's awesome, Dave, to have you joining me today. We were doing the Star Wars chats, but you're also an MCU guy, as I understand.
I've been rewatching with my wife all of the MCU movies, and we're now on our third go through during the lockdown. So,
whoa, okay, so you're going to be more up on than I am then. Okay, I mean, I have watched all the MCU movies. Just I have not recently done a binge marathon, so you're going to be more up on it than I am. Awesome. So yes, Black Widow obviously got postponed due to the pandemic.
Yeah,
it's coming out in November. You know, I was thinking of it in terms of, you know, to its credit, Endgame was this amazing finale.
Yeah,
it's like you got to get the momentum again. It's like it's a TV series.
Yeah,
essentially that just had an amazing that stuck the landing. You know, so many really good series don't stick the landing, like a Game of Thrones or Lost,
Star Wars, or
Sopranos. A little controversial in terms of that ending they had, but you know, like so this was like, you know, what was it? 2008 was when Iron Man came out originally. 2019. So it's a, you know, an 11-year TV series that had this really impactful series finale.
Yeah.
And so now we've got, it's not the spin-off, but kind of like the spin-off series. All right, we're starting again, new series. And, you know, Black Widow and I would say Far From Home, SpiderMan Far From Home are your first two movies in this new series that theoretically we've seen the template will probably end with we'll call it Endgame 2.
Mm-hmm.
Please don't call the movie Endgame 2.
Some kind of epic, cataclysmic kind of something.
Right.
Yeah.
And if they're lucky, it would be as equally successful and impactful. I mean, I'm sure that's what in their wildest dreams. They're like, could we do this twice and do this? You know. So with that in mind, I thought, okay, let's put Black Widow in the context of what were the first couple. You know, the first two movies in the Endgame cycle were Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk. And so if we take Far From Home and Black Widow as our first two movies in this one, you know, what echoes did we see from Iron Man, Incredible Hulk in Endgame? And perhaps what we know about Black Widow or what we can expect from Black Widow, what kind of echoes do we think might happen in Endgame 2, like, you know, years from now?
Right. Well, okay. So I'm gonna have to shift the focus of the conversation at least for a moment, because if we want to talk about what we think the Black Widow movie is going to be, we have to talk about the Black Widow story arc. Which, as I've gone back and rewatched these movies again and again, I've become increasingly enamored, enraptured, really fascinated by the Black Widow story arc, and I think it's one of the most powerful story arcs in this entire saga, and it's one of the most subtle. And I wanna focus on one particular scene. Okay, so the scene that I'm thinking of is kind of after they're on the run and they're going to camp. Is it Camp Lehigh?
Sure.
Yeah,
right.
and
she and Rogers.
And they're driving in a hot wired car. Steve, where did you learn to hotwire a car? You know, I wasn't just licking lollipops while I was in Europe, that kind of stuff. And so they're driving in the car, and Black Widow asks, kind of, who do you want me to be for you right now? And she's kind of being flirtatious, and this gets referenced later in Age of Ultron when Captain America says to Bruce Banner, "I've seen Nat flirt up close. This wasn't that flirting." So she's flirting with him, and she says, "Who do you want me to be?" And he says, "I want you to be a friend." And she says, "You might be in the wrong business for that." What's happening there is, for the first time, Nat, who has been a completely, like, a character who doesn't trust anyone and who is used to the kind of the double blind and all of that, suddenly she sees a person with no guile. And the person with no guile says, "I simply want to be your friend and I want to trust you." For the first time, Black Widow, Nat, figures out that she has an ally that she can trust. Now, you can argue that she's also got that with Hawkeye, but her relationship with Hawkeye is different, because for her, she sees that as an economic relationship. I've got red in my ledger. Whereas Steve has nothing. There's no economic relationship between her and Steve. All that Steve is offering is simply, "I'm going to trust you because that's what I do. Are you going to be trustworthy as a result of my trusting you. And by the end of that movie, Nat begins to feel like she's got a place with these people, which sets up why she does the kind of reversals that she does. What I think is that to kind of bring this to a quick close, and so we can begin to unpack it, I think that the story arc of Nat is Nat learning to trust the Avengers as her real family, and then in the end of the saga, she loses her family, and she becomes the kind of anchor point trying to get her family back. That is her complete motivation. She trusts these people, and she doesn't know how to operate without them. But I've said a lot. Let's kind of dig in.
Well, it's interesting, too, because there is a line, and I'm forgetting which movie it's in, but she says something on the lines of, "This is the first family I've ever known," something like that.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. But it is odd seeing the trailers for this new movie, because it feels like, but it's, just after Civil War, she goes back to her old family, right? It's like an old group of, there's the Red Guardian. She's got essentially like a superhero group that's behind, Russian lines, essentially. And so it's interesting that she would say later in the timeline, "This is, you guys, my only family." It suggests that all is not right with this group that she's theoretically going to go hang out with in this movie. That maybe it's not the family that at least we're seeing in the trailer, perhaps. Like, "Oh, these are my old buddies. Great. I'm glad to be back with them, and we're going to do some good." And
part of that has to do with when exactly the Black Widow movie is taking place in time. And let me say, not just in the past, but when is the Black Widow that is there in the past? Because we've already introduced time travel. And so is there, and I have no inside information on this at all, but is there a possibility that the Nat that we see in that timeline of the Black Widow movie is somehow a Nat who is informed by the information from the future, in a similar way that we saw Gamora become informed, like the Gamora of the past in Endgame become informed by the information of the future?
It's possible. I have not heard that. That's not to say that it couldn't be. Yes. And in fact, there's also, spoiler alert, she dies in Endgame. Or
if you don't know that by now.
Yeah. So, I mean, Endgame 2, could it have Black Widow in it? I think the answer is yes, it could, even though she's technically dead at this moment. She's on Vormir, or she died there, but we know that Steve Rogers gave that gem back on Vormir. Does that mean you get the soul back that you gave up to get it in the first? I don't know.
I want to ask a question about that, because in order to give that stone back, he had to engage with the Red Skull, and we now have from the directors that he actually did encounter the Red Skull. What do you think that scene was like?
I know. Actually, I would love to see. I don't know if it's a movie. Maybe it's on their Disney Plus, but it's like Steve Rogers gives back the Infinity Gems. And it's just a series of like what the hell he did in each of these little contexts to get the freaking gems back to where they needed to be.
Yes.
That one in particular would be like must see moviedom, must see TV.
I can
Steve
think
Rogers
there would be two awkward ones. One would be Red Skull, and one would be getting the kind of red vapor back into Jane. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That would be a tricky one as well. I don't know what that scene would be like, but it seems like Red Skull had some kind of a epiphany, late in life kind of epiphany is what they're kind of saying. Like, I was wrong in what I did, and my punishment is just, and here I am serving out my sentence. So, maybe it's just a meeting of former enemies who are now older and wiser. I don't know,
But I want to get back to the Black Widow story arc, just to say that having watched these movies now multiple times, if you go into it thinking, where is Black Widow's trust right now, and how is Black Widow feeling about her relationship to these people, there are some really amazing acting choices that Scarlett Johansson makes that, even though I'm betting that probably she didn't have the full picture in her head and nobody kind of looked into the future, my rewatching it, like, you can go back and see some ways that she chooses to look at another character, some ways she chooses to interact in a given moment, not with so much the delivery of the lines, but with the entirety of her kind of presentation, her body English, all of that. And it fits with this notion that she is gradually learning to trust these people, and then that begins to inform the choices that she makes later in the franchise. That's why I really have enjoyed going back and rewatching these, is because I had just ignored Black Widow as a character, I'll be honest, in the first couple of watch throughs. I mean, she can kind of twirl around somebody's neck and snap it. That's pretty cool. But I hadn't quite thought of her as a character with character development. I had thought of her sort of more as kind of color and flash on the sidelines. I'm realizing as I watch it that they had a plan in place for this character. And my bet is that the Black Widow movie is not simply going to be how does this fit in the storyline, but it's going to pick up several of the threads that have been pretty clearly laid down in the storyline: issues of trust, issues of betrayal, and issues of family. And that's going to become central to the theme of the Black Widow movie. But now, to get to your larger question, that can then lay the groundwork for trusting this, or for kind of looking at these themes of trust and family and betrayal moving into the next phase. Because, I mean, what was the first phase all about? Can the Avengers be a team? And how can they be a team? And finally, at the end, they are a team and they win together. But it takes them 20 movies to get there. Okay, so what are the themes that we're going to be picking up in this next set of the franchise? My bet is it's going to be these kind of questions of how do we build now trust with this new set of characters?
You know, I do feel like that sense that she theoretically never considered this group her family, I feel like there's going to be a betrayal. I think you're talking about betrayal and trust. I think
you mean like the Red Guardian and all that, that group. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a betrayal coming in that crew. What, just so we know generally what I'm getting, the vibe I'm getting from the trailers and such, it seems Mission Impossible-ish.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, okay, looks like a flash drive, something that she's got to acquire. There's something with the Black Widow training program that she feels like they're being brainwashed, and maybe she's trying to rescue. And
let's be honest, they literally are being brainwashed.
Yeah, they are being brainwashed. I mean, like being brainwashed, are being brainwashed. And so it seems like that at least part of her inspiration is to rescue these people that probably don't think they need rescuing in the moment. But this flash drive, I've heard, I saw some rumor that suggested it might be a software that erases your identity from, say, like government programs. And stuff. Maybe that she could use it. She's essentially on the run at this point, right? I mean, maybe she's going to try to use it to disappear herself or disappear people disappear these former Black Widow agents. I don't know. Perhaps. I don't know if that's the thing, but I think that MacGuffin is a flash drive that they have to try to acquire that is being highly protected. And she's got her old team. There is a connection back to the original, so Incredible Hulk introduced us to Thunderbolt Ross. Ross was in Civil War. And so he is also in this movie. It seems like he's still, he's attempting to find Natasha. And there's the hint that maybe, talking about the arc for Endgame 2, maybe we're going to see some of these folks a la Taskmaster. Taskmaster is the villain in this movie. I don't know a lot about him. I never read about him in the comics, but essentially Taskmaster can mimic the fighting styles of anybody he sees. And so we see in the trailer, he's like mimicking, he's got a little Iron Man, he's got a little Captain America, he's got a little Black Panther, he's got a little Hawkeye. So it seems like he's kind of taken the Avengers into his cadre of stuff. But in any case, folks like Taskmaster, probably some of these the Red Guardian style folks are going to join up with Thunderbolt Ross and become the Thunderbolts. Thunderbolts are a thing from the comics, otherwise known as the Dark Avengers, kind of like reformed supervillains that try to become a superhero team to varying levels of success.
Well, so are you suggesting the possibility that Thunderbolt Ross is going to fulfill his destiny and become Red Hulk?
I think that's a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes, I do. I think that's perhaps in the cards, but I feel like that's what we're going to set up is the origin of the Thunderbolts. Because Ross is like, hey, the Avengers can't be trusted. These Sokovia Accords, look how they were screwy. I'll create a new team, maybe that I have more control over, maybe, and maybe by being the Red Hulk, I'm part of the team now. Listen to me. I don't know, maybe.
Hey kids, I am also a kid. I am one of you.
Hey kid, I'm also a kid. Now, would Natasha be a part of the Thunderbolts? I think the answer is no. It's at least in that timeline, right? I mean, if that's at Civil War, we know that by Endgame, she's still hanging out with Team Avengers. So I don't know if that's the case, how that who joins, let's say, from the cast of folks that we know already. I might just be a completely new group of folks. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or not.
Well, I mean, you're introducing some interesting pieces. So let's look for a moment at Gamora. So she is dead in the timeline. Only she's reintroduced. She's brought back through a kind of loophole. And so she is now back in the Guardians. She's back in the present time in our universe.
Perhaps could be the Black Widow loophole.
Yeah, I mean, so there's no reason why the Black Widow movie can't exploit that loophole as well. So is it possible? And this is total conjecture. I don't have anything to go on this at all. Is it possible that in her fall, Nat had a Pym particle, or more than one Pym particle, such that she could zap out of the timeline back to this previous timeline, and then she is going to go on this adventure that will somehow weave together some pieces of these themes, but also weave together some pieces of the narrative that we haven't seen yet, where we begin to understand what was it that made her break with her original ties with the Red Room, and what makes her actually come to join S.H.I.E.L.D. What is the source of that deep affection and connection that she has with Hawkeye? Like, this is more than just an op went wrong and he saved my life. Like, we're going to get those pieces of the story, and we're going to understand why it was so difficult and why they were so tenacious about who was going to die in that moment between Nat and Hawkeye. I really am looking forward to those pieces of the story being more fleshed out. But what would then happen if she's gone back, and clearly somebody dies there on Vormir? So if she goes back, that means that somebody has to come forward again. Is the person that comes forward the same Nat that went back? Is the person that comes forward a different Nat, a Nat from the past that she somehow Pym particles into that place? Or is it somebody that looks like her? And sure. we know that there's going to be some kind of doppelganger pieces of this in this as well. So I've got no inside information on this at all. I'm just conjecturing, but that would be a way of bringing Nat back into the timeline, or at least bringing her into a timeline where she can function and not be dead, and would still have a certain amount of continuity based on what we know from Endgame in terms of what rule breakings of the Soul Stone they've allowed to happen, because Gamora is a breaking of the rule because she gets to come back.
Now it sounds like I think I know the answer, your answer to this question, but I'll pose it. You are correct that there are certainly ways within the rules they've already established that they could bring Nat back.
Yes.
Should they? I guess is a question, right? I mean, it sounds like you're going to say yes, and I'm not arguing that point. I'm just thinking there's value in the sacrifice she makes.
Yes, absolutely. And so, I mean, from a story standpoint, the finality of it, like, they shouldn't bring Tony Stark back. Okay, even though they kind of have with the glasses. Okay.
And apparently he's in a cameo in this one. It's back in time. So it's not like he's like, I'm back alive. And anyway, bye.
Yeah. No, so, I mean, okay. You're raising a really interesting question. Is the finality of the sacrifice important to the narrative? I think it is. And I think that Tony's finality of sacrifice, like if they were to find a way to bring Tony back, that would be cheap. I think that if they were to find a way to bring Nat back, that would be cheap. So I'm not sure that I want Black Widow to come back in the storyline of the present moving forward. But I think that if she okay, so we have the question then. Captain America goes back in time. why doesn't he do things like stop 9/11? Why do,
I know.
and so one of the questions might be, you know, is Nat going back in time? And again, this is completely conjecture. I don't know if she is, but if she goes back in time, does that somehow?
This is fine.
Yeah. If now you have two characters with future knowledge going back in time, what would they feel obligated to change, and what would they know that they couldn't? And I mean, this begins to be the kind of, you know, there's an entire storyline that could take place fleshing out in that previous time with both Nat and Steve, where they encounter one another and they realize, oh my gosh, we're both from the future. We both know what happened. And now we're stuck here. What do we do? I mean, that's interesting. I'm not sure if I'm betting that they're never going to touch that, but those kind of questions become very interesting. And I mean, you know, it's just interesting to me that we now have, even though they have said at several points that you can't break the timeline, we already know at least 1, 2, 3 breaks in the timeline. So Steve going back,
they break the timeline.
Steve going back breaks the timeline. Loki breaks the timeline, and
which is going to lead into the Loki series.
The Loki series
on Disney Plus.
Yeah, and Gamora breaks the timeline. So we know of at least 3 breaks in the timeline. What does that mean, given the fact that Bruce promised to the Ancient One that the timeline wouldn't be broken? I don't know. I mean, now we have the multiverse. Now we have the multiverse, literally.
Yeah, and I think there was at some point the point was brought up. Well, maybe Steve created like an alternate, you know, timeline, and he's living out. But the show creator's like, no, he's back in this one. Like he stayed in the timeline that we're familiar with, and just aged up. You're like, okay, all right, but yeah, you're right. He stayed on the sidelines, if that's the case, or maybe he didn't, and it somehow in the background was doing things, and we didn't realize. But anyway, I don't know. I would watch that. I'm gonna if that's all right. Yeah, old man Steve Rogers. Let's do it. I'm gonna list out the next series of movies that are coming out in this next the spinoff series. We can kind of get an idea of maybe where they're going character wise. You've got Black Widow coming out. You've got now. There's the Disney Plus stuff, and you know when Netflix obviously had Daredevil. And, you know, they had a whole series of heroes that did not impact the MCU at all. Maybe because things like Falcon and Winter Soldier and WandaVision are on Disney Plus. Maybe that means they're going to try to incorporate them. But I'm thinking they're still going to maybe keep those as separate entities. I don't know what your thought is on that. But so let's assume for a second that they're separate entities and we're just looking at the movies. So the movies that they have planned out, you know, The Eternals is due to come out, I think, after Black Widow. And that's a big change up. You're going to meet a whole raft of folks that we have never met before, kind of Guardians of the Galaxy style, where it's like, who are these folks? What? Okay. You know, again, I hadn't read the Eternals comics, but Cersei, Icarus, Gilgamesh, Black Knight, there's a whole bunch of these folks. They've apparently been living on Earth in hiding for thousands of years. Now they have to unite to basically stop their evil counterparts, the deviants. So in any case, that's going to be a whole new, you know, panoply of a galaxy of stars. How they'll fit in later, I don't know, but we're going to definitely meet some new folks. You've got Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. That is also coming out. Then you've got a series of things that we're more familiar with. Spider-Man 3, Thor, Love and Thunder, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, directed by Sam Raimi. That's going to be great. Black Panther 2. So we get Black Panther. Captain Marvel 2. Guardians of the Galaxy 3. Ant-Man 3. And then we get introduced to probably, where it's still a little nebulous, but Blade is almost certainly coming. And then maybe a Fantastic Four. So it's going to be a while where we're going to meet some new characters, but then we're going to, again, we'll be reminded that if you call it the spinoff series, the Endgame 2 series has a lot of characters we're familiar with. Spider-Man, Thor, Doctor Strange, Black Panther, Captain Marvel. How do these folks begin lining up with what will be Endgame 2. It's kind of interesting to plot that out.
I have some thoughts.
Yep.
So one of the things that we know. So let's take, for example, the two Hulk movies. Ang Lee's is non-canonical. It's not part of the canon. But the one that came out then, the Incredible Hulk with Ed Norton, is canonical. But in religion terms, we'd call it deuterocanonical. So the actor that played the Hulk is not the actor moving forward, but some aspects of the story have been included. And so it is kind of on the edge, but it's not as central to the storytelling as some other pieces are. But it has a reservoir of canonical material that gets carried into the franchise itself. Okay, given that, let's look at some of the TV series so far. Okay, so for example, The Inhumans. Okay, The Inhumans is not anywhere really acknowledged as canonical. It was an experiment and it was abandoned. And so they are not interfacing with this universe at all. And those characters that were introduced in that way with those canonical story beats are not going to be part of this. The question then is, will the entire Netflix experiment, which includes not just Daredevil, but also Jessica Jones and Luke Cage and Iron Fist and the Defenders,
right?
Okay, will that story, that encapsulated story, will it be another kind of Inhumans where it exists as a property and it's got Marvel's name on it, but it's not acknowledged in the universe? Or will it be Ang Lee's Hulk? Or will it become the kind of deuterocanonical version where aspects of it, even if the same actors are not brought up into the canonical storyline, it will become a trove of canonical pieces for the storyline, a la the Incredible Hulk, the Ed Norton Hulk, where Ed Norton or that actor doesn't become, but other actors from the series come into the franchise, and storylines come into the franchise. Okay, my bet is that the Netflix series, I don't even know how to say that plurally, but my bet is that those Netflix series will come in that deuterocanonical fashion. They won't be ignored, but you may not see those actors again, which honestly, with Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, and Matt Murdock, that breaks my heart because they did that so well.
Yeah, the actor who played Matt Murdock, there was a theory that maybe he was going to be returning for Spider-Man 3. He's going to be Peter Parker's lawyer.
That would delight me.
He said, I mean, could he be lying? Sure, but he's like, no one's contacted me. I'm not saying Daredevil isn't in the movie, but it ain't me playing Daredevil in the movie.
Yeah.
So I was like, he was great as Daredevil.
He was perfect. But then again, I don't think that anybody saw it coming that Steve Rogers was going to, oh, sorry, spoiler alert, that anyone saw that Steve Rogers was going to wield Mjolnir either. Okay. So it is possible that we have some surprises in store for us in this.
Yeah. No, it just felt like I kept waiting for that shoe to drop because we covered a lot of the Defenders and Jessica Jones and Daredevil on Dork Lords. And it seemed like every time a new season, Luke Cage came around, we were like, all right, is this where they're going to link it in? And they never did. It never got there. And so I feel like that's just, it's a bridge that's out and they'll never meet. But they can refer to things, I suppose. But yeah.
But there's also an aspect in which I love that, because if you think about the Star Wars problem, the universe ended up being so small, and it all revolved around one group of characters that always had to be together. I actually kind of like the idea that the Marvel Universe has disconnected bits that aren't talking to one another. Like, that's partly why the Avengers slow burn and build worked so well, was because a lot of these people weren't on each other's radar. And so you get a sense of the vastness of the story world, which is really satisfying to me. So if the Defenders are their completely own thing, and they were a flash in the pan that came together once within this story world, that actually makes sense. And the fact that,
and as street level heroes, as opposed to saving the universe, you can imagine that they might get overlooked by the Avengers.
Exactly.
Instance,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, and if you think about it, that actually, I mean, so in the comic book universe, all of these different super teams existing together, you never quite got a sense, or at least I didn't, and maybe it does exist in the various comic books, but I never got a sense of the vastness of that world. It's like, okay, go down the street, take a corner at the McDonald's, and like walk 2 blocks and you're at the Defenders, but if you go another 6 blocks, you're at the Avengers.
It's true, they're all in like boroughs of New York.
Exactly,
Like,
and cross the border to the north, you get Alpha Flight and that kind of stuff. And the other kind of piece of this, in terms of the vastness of the story world and teams existing without knowing about one another, is that the disconnection between the Defenders and the Avengers actually helps us explain, if it ever happens, how the X-Men will come into this universe. Because the X-Men have had
I think it's happening.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that it is, but the X-Men have a reason to be in the dark and off the radar of S.H.I.E.L.D. and everybody else, and you could make some plausible points that, you know, of anyone, these are enhanced beings that were able to be, you know, in the shadows until they needed to come out. And so I really like that the story world allows for that possibility, because the Defenders sort of sets the precedent. Yeah.
It seems like the Eternals may kind of double down on that idea.
Well, and the Skrull as well. So the Skrull storyline also gives us that. So
yeah, no, agreed. Yeah, it's not the worst thing in the world. It's just those were Jessica Jones and Luke Cage and Daredevil in particular. Iron Fist not so much, but
no, Iron Fist sucked.
The other three were such quality projects.
Yes.
It was like, oh, why not?
Yeah.
Why not? You know, you're just enhancing your own universe by bringing these quality folks in. But
yeah,
whatever, it is what it is. You were mentioning Incredible Hulk, and obviously that was the second movie.
Yes.
In our, which it would be kind of the parallel to Black Widow. One thing I was thinking about was Iron Man and Incredible Hulk. Two things that kind of just didn't progress from there were the villains, right? So you had the Abomination in Incredible Hulk and Ironmonger in Iron Man. And those were just, you know, they were villains for that moment. And, you know, we didn't necessarily see those ripples happen into Endgame. So theoretically, I mean, we'll see, but maybe the villains, let's say Taskmaster, who knows, could be somebody who disappears by the end. Although if he joins the Thunderbolts, maybe that's a way that we see this villain, unlike those earlier villains, find some impact later in life. It does feel like the MCU maybe got a little smarter with its villains over time. That at first I think they were disposable, kind of like a one movie, kill it, it's gone, next villain. Somewhere along the line, they started thinking, oh, maybe these villains, they can have arcs of their own. So maybe that's not a good parallel, because they're informed now. By the time they hit this movie, they're like, okay, we kind of have figured out how to do Killmonger versus Ironmonger. You know, like, okay, let's figure this out. Let's do something really cool. Anyway, but
I mean, I think that you're right, and the place. Well, they now. You're right that they figured it out, because they had a kind of multiple threat in the distance arc heading up to Endgame, you know, and so that was going on. But they also have a multiple they haven't handled it as well as they did with the Endgame arc. But the whole notion of the 10 rings and the notion of, you know, the Mandarin, you know, we haven't seen the true Mandarin yet, apparently, and so that also is going to be kind of an interesting kind of multi-arc to see how they play that out in a way that is satisfying, and I bet that they will. But I was really disappointed. I find Ben Kingsley's kind of reversal entertaining, in terms of being like the really spooky and really effective Mandarin, and then he comes back and he's like the, you know, basically the buffoon Mandarin. I would have loved to have seen a multi-story arc with Ben Kingsley as the real evil Mandarin, because he did it so well. So we'll see who they get to be the, you know, how that character of the real Mandarin plays out. But the other thing that we haven't really seen, I mean, we've kind of gotten hints at it, but we haven't really seen it, is like a bad guy team up. And one of the things that I'm excited about with the SpiderMan addition to the franchise is that it really, you know, the Sinister Six might be something that is coming up on the horizon.
Almost certainly. Right?
Almost certainly. And they've set it up really well. but let's explore now that the Avengers are an actual functioning super team. It's got to be the next piece in the story that, one big bad, even the galactic big bad, is not able to beat the team once they're a team. So now what do? You now need to have the bad guys starting to team up and realizing that there's strength in numbers for them too. But then now let me also ask, because, a team up might be a good midpoint threat for whatever comes next, like the Avengers or the Fantastic Four or whatever. So it's a midpoint in this next saga that you're talking about. But now we have to ask, who's going to be the next super big bad? And one of the things that I would love to see, particularly if the Fantastic Four come into the franchise, I would love to see Galactus.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to.
You're thinking about Doctor Doom, but I'm thinking about Galactus.
I was.
Yeah. Okay, but
I'm a Doctor Doom fan.
Yeah, let's. I am too. Well, let's go with either of those. So, what would it look like with Doctor Doom being the big bad at the end of this next set of the sagas?
Well, the cool thing about Doctor Doom is that he is he's a villain for all seasons. Like he can do your techno villainry, he can do like a magic villainry, he can just he's smart, but he's strong, but he's pretty much got the whole range of things. He can fill in the gap of any, I oppose this hero, I oppose that hero. He could fit in pretty much any of those arcs. And so I think the ease at which you can put him in makes him just an obvious choice, and his power level is so high. Why not? So far, live action Doctor Doom has been terrible.
It has been so bad.
But I trust the MCU to bring us the first awesome live action Doctor Doom.
I really like that. And I'm trusting, like you're trusting, that the MCU would get the gravitas and the necessity of doing Doctor Doom correctly. Because so far he's just been, just completely wrong in terms of how he's been presented. I think that what they did with Thanos, in terms of translating Thanos from the comic page into the movie world, was really effective. Thanos was a character with a story arc, had motivation, had conflict, had growth. Really interesting the way that they did that. And they took what was kind of a powerful but kind of two-dimensional character in the comics and really made a three-dimensional character, and hats off to them for doing that.
Yep.
Galactus is another two-dimensional character. I want to eat worlds. Like, that's his motivation. I think that the
Big Hat.
Yeah, and Big Hat. And the MCU would need to figure out a way to flesh out Galactus as a character and make, to not
more
have
than a force of nature. Really get like a
because what you don't want for the big bad is for Galactus to basically be a hyped up steroided Dormammu who just I just want to extend the Dark Realm. That's it. That's the Dark Dimension is my thing, and that's why I'm here. And you can scare me.
I mean, I just reminded me of Game of Thrones, but Night King, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the idea was, we've got this political intrigue. The houses are vying for stuff, and it's the humans are the real monsters in a way. And then there was like, this force of nature comes in.
Yeah.
And it kept waiting for a twist. I kept waiting for it to be like, actually his agenda. Nope. It was just this big bad thing with a bunch of zombies behind it, and it didn't mesh with the rest of what the story was about.
Nope.
And so it really felt awkward. So I'm thinking if Galactus needs to be better than the depiction of the Night King. Won't just be thing that comes in and destroys everything.
Yeah. But this also speaks to your kind of Endgame Mark II kind of thing. Like, we've already done the galactic threat. Like, the galactic threat was Thanos, and we bested the galactic threat. And so now, how can we explore the idea that the powerful enemy is us? How can we take the central trope of Iron Man, and really of the entire series, that Tony Stark creates all the monsters that Tony Stark has to fight, and how do we then expand that into the universe? How now have the Avengers, in defeating Thanos, how have they now created the next set of big bads that they have to fight? And one way of doing that would be to either bring in the mutant threat like Magneto, who is a character who would be really interesting to see let loose in this universe, or Doctor Doom, because Doctor Doom, again, would be an example of a human-sized threat with godlike powers, but with human motivations. And that's really interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
It is, I know that's relevant necessarily, but it's one of the things anecdotally I learned from improv was the stuntmen, the group, we do these improvised action movies. Okay. So get a title from the audience, make a little action movie out of it. Make our own little Endgame. But something I noticed was it worked much better if you gave the villain a face. In other words, gave the villain a personality. If the villain was a shark, Jaws, whatever, it was really tough to play that on stage and be engaging with it. It was like, oh, the shark, he's still, oh God, it's still bad. As opposed to, it's a mastermind who's controlling sharks. I would, my go-to is always find a way to, whatever the threat is. If the threat is a shark, find a way to make it a person, make it somebody with personality, with feelings, that's sentient, that you can then bargain with, talk to, be afraid of. Like that makes for a much better storyline in that way. So I think maybe that's kind of what we're talking about here.
I want to yes and that and say, in addition to giving the villain a face, the wisdom of understanding that the villain always believes that they're actually the hero of the story is really a powerful piece. And that's what the MCU got so right with this saga that just concluded with Endgame. Thanos believed he was the hero. Thanos thought that the entire universe would be grateful for what he had done. He was an eco-terrorist, but he was motivated by the loftiest of goals. I want to make sure that everyone's quality of life moving forward is higher than it is now, and that the kind of fighting for resources ends. I mean, he really truly believed that he was on a noble quest. He did not believe that he was the villain, and that made him a fascinating character to watch. And also it made the possibility of some of the movies being movies where Thanos' story arc was the hero story arc, and the Avengers in some ways were the villains within the structure of that movie. Just fascinating.
Infinity War definitely felt like he was doing the hero's journey. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's fascinating because it reverses a lot of the expectations of these kind of movies. I mean, hats off to Martin Scorsese, but he got it so wrong about the value of these movies in terms of not just amusement park rides, but in terms of storytelling. The storytelling is so well crafted. It's so powerful. And going back, and like I said, we've gone back and we watched it now kind of 3 times through. It's really tight. Every narrative is going to have loose ends. That's unavoidable. But the ways in which this particular set of stories mesh together, and the echoes and the things that get planted in one movie end up paying off, literally 10, 12 movies later. I'm going to get you all the cheeseburgers you want. Oh, think about that.
I am Iron Man.
Exactly.
That tagline.
Yeah. So those pieces, I mean, I'm really pleased with how well it's been stitched together. And like you said, I trust these storytellers to carry it forward into the next phase.
So do we feel like, obviously in Far From Home, it felt like the torch was being passed to Peter, like as though you're the next Iron Man. Do we feel like that maybe SpiderMan is carrying some kind of it'll have an arc similar, not Iron Man's arc, but the background of this Endgame 2 will have a Spider-Man arc to it. Is that kind of what we're seeing? Or
I can't get there given all of the nonsense that's happening with Sony. I can't see MCU banking that Spider-Man can be a tentpole character that way. He's going to be important to the storytelling, but they're going to keep him a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man even at this point. And I don't think that he can become the central character that Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark was to the franchise. And the problem that I see is with the killing of Black Widow, I don't know who the tentpole character moving forward is going to be.
To ask, you've expected my question, which is because Robert Downey Jr. is he is the face of the Avengers.
Yeah, as much as I love and just you can ask my wife Kira just how much I stan Captain Marvel and how glad I am and how just utterly gushingly just ecstatic I was when the Captain Marvel movie came out. Really, really glad that they incorporated that character. Really glad that they incorporated that character the way that they did. Even with all of that, I don't see Captain Marvel able to be a tentpole character, which means probably that there are movies in the upcoming roster that they haven't talked about yet. Because I could easily see if they're able to introduce Fantastic Four, and if they're able to have, and this is my hope, I would stand this so hard as well, if John Krasinski is able to be Reed Richards. That would be my pick. Okay, if that is the case, you now have a person who can pull off both serious and wisecracking with good dramatic and comedic chops at the level of Robert Downey Jr., who has established himself both as an action and a comedic powerhouse. John Krasinski could be a tentpole character for this next franchise moving forward as Reed Richards. He's got the smarts, but he's also got the weaknesses, and the actor can play both. So
my only reservation on that, I totally agree that could certainly work. I just wonder, because we're talking at least 8 movies, maybe 10 movies before we hit that. Is that too far into the saga to then introduce the tentpole of the saga? Yeah. I don't know. It might be. I feel like that tentpole character's got to show up fairly early in this so that we can see that arc play out. But
no, I think you're right, which is why I'm saying if it was an unannounced film, if it was an unannounced property, if they kind of brought it into the timeline, early in the timeline as opposed to later. But yes, I think that the obstacles that you're seeing are correct. Like that would be, in my perfect world, that would be kind of how the franchise would tentpole moving forward. But I don't necessarily see them doing that. But then I don't know who we have seen on the playing field at this point would be that
Black Panther, perhaps.
Maybe. I mean, he's definitely got the charisma. The thing that we haven't seen so much is the weakness. And
I got you.
And that was one of the things that the choices that Favreau made.
Well, when he takes that, whatever that herb is, it drops his powers away.
Well, but I'm not talking physical weakness. Physical weakness.
Right.
I'm talking character weakness. The kind of inside frailty that needs to be overcome and can't be overcome in necessarily one movie. And so the Iron Man 1, 2, and 3 story arc sets up the problems that we then see playing out in Civil War and that need to be repaired all the way up to Endgame. And in Endgame,
I will say, at least in Civil War, I think it was Civil War. Yeah, when he forgives Zemo in that moment, right? Like he sees Zemo as the guy who killed his dad.
You mean Black Panther, not Tony Stark.
Yeah,
sorry. Okay.
Right. Sorry. Black Panther.
Yes.
And it seemed like that was we saw a vengeful Black Panther up to that moment, and that he was able to grow and to say, you know what, I offer forgiveness in this moment. Perhaps that was a bit I don't say of a weakness, but must kill revenge was transferred to like I'm a wiser person now, and I see that this isn't really necessarily going to get humanity anywhere if we're constantly just killing each other because we feel affronted.
The key to kind of Robert Downey's portrayal of Iron Man throughout the entire saga is the secret of his heart. Like what is he going to do to actually get in touch with his heart? And that involves reconciliation with his family. That involves reconciliation with those that he has hurt in the past. That involves reconciliation with the Avengers. And at the end, and it also involves, how is he going to carry forward his legacy with people like Pepper and Morgan and all that. And so at the end of Endgame, we see the completion of all of those kind of moments of question. Tony still hasn't figured out his heart yet. I haven't figured out what the central question for Black Panther would be moving forward. I mean,
I got you.
Black Panther is a wonderful character, and I really like the way that he has been portrayed. But this may be an example of where in my initial viewings of this, I have treated Black Panther kind of the way that I was treating Black Widow initially, and that when I go back and watch it again, I'll realize that they have been doing very careful, subtle character creation and development along the way. It's very possible that I missed something. So you've now given me a reason to go back and watch these things a fourth time.
Well, I'll say I'm also excited because there's the rumor that what would be the villain, let's just say, in Black Panther 2, who would then probably transfer into a at least partial hero later, is Namor.
Oh, yeah.
And I grew up, it was in Germany, used to watch these old Submariner cartoons. I was a huge Submariner fan from a little kid. I had a Submariner poster. So to see, and I always hated Aquaman. And so I was like, boo, Submariner. Anyway, so to have the Submariner hit the MCU, I'm really excited about that possibility. And so if that comes in with the Black Panther, even more reason to like the Black Panther storyline. But in any case, that's something I'm looking forward to. Yeah, so Black Widow obviously is on the horizon. We've talked about a few ways in which we think maybe it'll echo farther along with or without Black Widow in it. Now, perhaps there is a version of Black Widow or someone imitating Black Widow or some version of Black Widow does last into the series. That remains to be seen. Obviously, I think that's going to be, if not answered, at least hinted at in this movie. But I look forward to watching this video 12 years from now when Endgame 2 has come out and we're like, oh, right, that was how this movie was informed by the Black Widow movie. But I don't know. Any final thoughts, sir, on your expectations for Black Widow going forward and stuff?
Well, I will say that my expectations are high, and I'm really excited for this movie. I think that they have set up the possibilities, and that Scarlett Johansson has portrayed the character in such a way that they have a lot of possibilities for making it a really satisfying story, both as a standalone piece of narrative, but also in terms of how it ties together these other bigger pieces of the narrative. So I'm very excited for it. I would love to come back afterwards and do a debrief and kind of look at how some of the things that we've talked about here played out or didn't play out. Even before we get to Endgame Mark II, a dozen years from now, let's come back and talk about Black Widow after it drops. But also, anytime, I am happy to come back and just get absolutely nerdy about the MCU, because the more that I watch it, the more that I think I've never seen storytelling like this in my life. And all the things that I had wanted the Star Wars franchise to be, it wasn't, but the MCU is delivering in a way that I have never seen another franchise deliver. So I'm very happy to go into the woods on this and just get as nerdy as you want.
Awesome. Well, there's going to be these Disney Plus MCU things coming out. I'd love to maybe find one of those to chat with you about. If you want to do some chatting about a series,
let's do it.
And I'm excited. So awesome to have you on board, Mr. Dalt, as always.
Thank you.
And thanks so much. And everybody, we'll see you next time. Awesome. Bye.